Christians in Profession is new in Gießen. A hearty welcome from my side. As a former Gießen citizen, I can say this: I studied here and I have worked for a long time with Campus for Christ, a local Christian organization, as a staff member, director, employee on various levels. Great that you're here. And perhaps this will be a new start for your group in Gießen. I wish it would. As to me, I studied English and physical education to teach in grammar school, and I wanted to become a teacher. But then there were other plans from a higher level. God has accompanied me through various stations in my life. I had the privilege of growing up in a home that was really shaped by the Christian faith. My father read from the Bible on the dinner table, prayed, then we talked about it sometimes, and parents told me, God loves everyone, and you too. And I was able to feel this in the atmosphere in our home. But they also told me, just by growing up in a Christian family doesn't make you a Christian automatically. You have to decide for yourself whether God can get involved in your life or whether he has got to stay outside. I like that, because this voluntary decision is something you appreciate as a young person. You don't want everything to be organized and set for you. You want to make your own decisions too. And I did this later. So there were many encounters with God in my life, and a strong impression was that I should not go into state school service, but with the situation in our universities, where I perceived a pretty strongly anti-Christian, anti-biblical, anti-God atmosphere and worldview, I had to ask myself, what's going to happen? These colleagues, fellow students that don't go to church any longer, that don't read the Bible anymore, for whom all of this has worked like a vaccination and they'd never want to get to know the real thing anymore. What if they enter positions of responsibility in society, leadership, judges, doctors, entrepreneurs, economic leaders, journalists, all of this? What kind of orientation do they get? What will they pass on? That really drove me. It shook me. I got to know the Campus for Christ movement, very good literature, and I found out there are a lot of people who are very clever scientists, and they combine science and faith without any problem from all the fields. And the Christian faith has the best ways into the future for us. God used this to cause a decision within me not to enter the school service after my studies, but to work full-time with Campus. And I was in Gießen for quite some time. So, welcome in Gießen. I brought my wife along. She's in the back and observes everything and gives me feedback later. Both of us are in two different economic fields, active in fields. She in the area of health. She helps people become healthy and stay healthy and advises them. And I'm into adult education. I lead a Professors Forum that I started in 1996, almost 30 years ago, to bring the professors that influence the university in contact with the Christian worldview and Jesus Christ, and to strengthen the Christian professors in this task. Across the faculties, across the Christian creeds, as long as they share the Nicene creed of faith and our Christ-centeredness, which is our core. So this is what I do right now. And in that framework, I got to know many people. And you can ask the question, how does an English and physical education teacher get into ethics of economics, what I have taught in various teaching jobs and which I address in my talks? This has to do with people that you meet and that give you an orientation and impulses. One of these people was my mentor, Johann Millendorfer, an Austrian physicist who received a call by God to start a future research center in order to observe society. Where are we going? As one of the first, he used computer-based system analysis to make prognosis at the end of the 70s when this just started. On the basis of these computer-based analyses, he did much better prognosis than his colleagues, and he was highly requested. And he got a request from a research job from the Kiel Institute of World Economics. What is the reason for the decline in industrial societies? He found 4 major factors, which I don't want to address tonight, but this is what caused me to look after this topic. So we thought about 4 mechanisms of destruction. He changed it into diseases. He played around with it creatively with these results. And then he asked himself, what kind of therapies, what could we do to address these diseases? And as he thought about the therapies, he discovered values which bring basic statements and values that Jesus expressed in the New Testament. That led him to the conclusion, as a believer, Catholic, he knew Jesus' statements, that led him to the conclusion to say, the future is either Christian or there won't be any. Because the therapies that this declining industrial society needs, they are profoundly Christian. They are originated in the gospel of Jesus. And in the 70s and 80s, this was so revolutionary. No one would believe this, because we had all been so brainwashed that economics is something material. You don't need religion in it. You do it with numbers, with business administrations, with success models. That's how you do business. But that the decisive things are processes that happen between humans. That was shut out for a long time. I will address this in my presentation later. But I thought, if this is so, then we need to bring this on the stage. We need to talk about these values. That's the bedrock of this presentation here. I chewed it and polished it over 30 years, and you can see the result of this process. I brought 7 values as an overview. 7 values of success our future depends upon. The first is work. How do we handle work? What does work mean for us? Second word, integrity, or value. How do I treat truth? How do I live? Am I truthful, integrated? Do my words find into actions? Do my actions feel my words? You can get these transparencies. It will also be recorded, and you can watch it in the internet. Third value, trust, comes out of integrity and truthfulness. That is the basis for trust, and trust is the foundation for every relationship, be it friendship, partnership, business relationship. Fourth value, respect and dignity, 2 aspects of one value. The fifth, responsibility. 6, sustainability. And 7, courage. I would like to go into depth with each of these. Before I do that, I would like to present some contemporaries that have made statements to these values. Clever, intelligent people, more or less famous, economic or sociology professors, German sociologist, director of London School of Economics, co-founder of University in Constance, member of German Parliament, member of Parliament of House of Lords. Briefly before his death in 2009, he gave an interview to the German political magazine Cicero. He gave an interview in 2009, from saving capitalism to loan capitalism. That's the development that we have made in the last decades, living on loan more and more and taking the future into our present, and make it hollow, empty the future in order to consume it now. That's what we are facing, whether we like it or not. In this interview, Dahrendorf said the climate of Protestant ethics arose only in one place of the world. Protestant ethics is considered as the foundation of economic success by experts. Max Weber wrote a famous book, Protestant Ethics and the Spirit of Capitalism. He was a sociologist as well. And Dahrendorf continues, this attitude is not only a mark of the culture of bourgeoisie, but it's also the engine of economic development. My next contemporary, an Indian professor of macroeconomics, Prabhu Guptara. For a long time he worked with UBS Bank in Switzerland, in charge of the training center, internationally traveling. And he asked some questions when he looked at Central Europe from a different continent. And he asked, why was Europe, that until the 16th century belonged to the houses of poverty, poor houses in the world, became one of the richest in the world? How did that happen? Did it fall from the sky? Why is Tibet not as wealthy as Switzerland? Same geographical environment, people like us. Why are they still in poverty without economic success? And why is Madagascar not as developed as England? A few years ago in my local newspaper there was a full-page covering on Madagascar, and it read that the children in this rich country with so many resources, fruits and harvests, growth, they are still dependent on the world hunger, world support. They are not allowed to eat lychees because of religious reasons, because people fear they will cause malaria. The answer that Prabhu Guptara found was one of the key factors was the Reformation. That created a culture oriented by the values of the Bible, in which an honest achievement, performance of work is demanded in exchange for appropriate profit, justice in payment. In the same way, protection of private property, strong, big topic in the Bible. The prophets in the Bible always come out against the injustices that in this people of God that was so close to God and then turned away from him so heavily, they spoke against this injustice. Just, honest wages and protection of private property, big topics of the Bible. Another contemporary, a Chinese professor whom I was able to get to know personally, just like Prabhu Guptara. I translated Prabhu Guptara, not the Chinese professor. I just met him personally. He was a consultant to the government, Cao Xiao, macroeconomics, Technical University, Beijing. In 2000, as a communist and atheist, he went to the United States to find out the causes of the economic advance the US have. You have to know that the Chinese, in their blood, know that they are the number one. The country of the middle. Very early it was even the land of God before Confucius. They had similar sacrificial rituals like the Jews and Noah. It seems like it has to do with the sons of Noah, their distribution around the world after the flood. There's research. I've brought one book, China's True Greatness, where you can read more about this. But Chinese, number one. Only through the colonial war with the British did they have a painful defeat, which they have not overcome. If you know that, then you can understand politics better. I studied the Bible with a Chinese professor living here in Gießen for over 6 years and had many discussions with him. It opened my mind and view on these cultural issues. So went to the United States to find out why are they better. What can we do to be equally good or overtake them? Then in his visit in Germany, that was in 2007, yes, in the framework of the Christian Leadership Congress in Leipzig, where I attended. That's where we met. He gave another interview for Cicero, this political magazine, and in this interview he stated, why has the United States economics been so much more successful over such a long period? It is the Christian foundation. And he wrote the most read economic article in China from 2000 to 2010. As a result, he became a Christian himself because it's the better worldview, as he found out. It was a moving experience for me to meet such a person who had grown up as a communist and atheist and then changed his opinion because he looked at economics in practical life. What is successful economics? It comes from this book, the Bible, and it is connected to this personal faith. And then he became a Christian, and after this 2-hour conversation, he said, "Oh, I need to meet the mayor of Leipzig. Could we pray together for this conversation, this encounter?" I tell you, I had tears in my eyes. It was very moving to meet this man. Now I'd like to talk about these 7 success values our future depends upon. That was introduction. First value, work. New work. The assiduity, hard work, and thoroughness. This commitment to quality of German engineers. This dedication to hard work. This assiduity and honesty. This dedication that we have in our culture that you don't necessarily find in other cultures. Where does it come from? Is it the Germans that are especially good, better than others? Or does it have any causes? The Indian economist already pointed to this. It's the Reformation that has changed this land and this culture. In school, we rarely learn this, or only very weakly, what we owe to this Reformation. Next. I'd like to go back to the roots, because we have this topic, values without roots. It's dangerous in this time where ecology is such a big topic, sustainability, protecting creation, or only nature if you don't believe in creation. It's so important to ask yourself, where does it come from? What roots do our values have? Our values are from the Bible. We owe them to the Bible. Probably no pastor ever told this because they don't think economically, but if you read the Bible as an economist, you discover very quickly that God is an entrepreneur. What makes an entrepreneur? He has an idea of something that is not existing yet, and then he builds it. He creates an enterprise, a service, a product, a production line. He needs engineers, and then he puts it into practice, and he works on it. God had an idea, and he created this world, and he worked for 6 days, and on the 7th he rested. And then he inserted in a steward, man. Be fruitful and multiply, he told them. That means mold, lead, and keep it for the generations to follow. Now the question, if we contrast this, is this really the case? Are we creation in the image of God, like he said to people? Or are we, as we're being told in the school, many biologists no longer believe in God. If they are consistent in their thinking, they have to assume chance as the origin. If there's no creator who has thought man and created him, then we are a product of slime plus time plus chance. We're being thrown into life involuntarily, and we leave it. Usually involuntarily too, Today there are debates whether you can also leave life voluntarily, but we'll leave that aside for this time. This has great effects on who I am and how I see myself. What I believe as cause for my existence. Because if I'm the image of God, I have a commission here, a responsibility and an obligation and an identity. I am someone who responds. If I'm just a product of chance, then there are no values. Like Dostoevsky expressed this, if there is no God, everything is allowed. He was a contemporary of Charles Darwin, through whom this evolution theory without God came into the world. And he saw some things ahead that happened terribly later in Russia that were put into practice. Next picture. If I'm only a product of chance, then things look pretty dark and gloomy, because then I'm an endangerment for this planet. Arthur Koestler, a Hungarian English journalist and writer, and very engaged communist and very soberized when he saw what happened afterwards in Russia, he wrote this book, Man, the Error of Evolution. And in this book he describes man as a weed in the vegetable garden of nature. If you see the Fridays for Future movement today, there are many young women who don't want children any longer. Because children are dangerous for the future of the planet. They exhale too much carbo-oxygen. I saw a desperate face of a woman. You could see how she was suffering from this decision not to have children. It's cruel. It's self-destructive. Children are the future. They bring the potential for solutions into the world. They have been equipped with creativity. If children are in the image of the Creator, then each child is a creation and a revelation to make this world new. But if they are products of chance and weeds in the garden of nature and errors of evolution, then no children is better. Then you dispose them. If you think of the developments today, you can have second thoughts. Next picture. The Bible opens a great chance in this situation, a way out of this desperate hopelessness to have been thrown into this earth without having wanted to, and to experience yourself as weed. The Bible shows that it has a cause. There was a decision that we made as humans to move out of the field of blessing that the Creator had made for us in this famous biblical report on the fall. As this is expressed, God created this garden with hundreds of trees and bushes, and men were allowed to eat from all of this, except for one tree. That was kind of the testing tree, whether they will trust him or turn against him. What happens? Humans are deceived and eat from that tree, the knowledge of good and evil. You have probably heard this argument in school that comes out of this clever heads that have learned Greek philosophy and are shaped by it. Yeah, there you can see. You see it. God wanted to keep us stupid. He didn't want us to eat from the tree of knowledge. But science has eaten from this tree of knowledge. Look at all of the things that we have discovered and developed. That's why faith is something for stupid people. God wanted to keep us little stupid. I tell you, this is the biggest nonsense, bullshit. Because we don't know the original language, we don't know the culture. The Bible was not written in Greek, the Old Testament. It's not the Greek culture that brought forth the Bible, the philosophers. The Bible was written in Hebrew. The word to know in the Bible is described in the first chapters, the meaning. Adam knew his wife, Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. That's a bit different from what the Greek philosophers thought about in their heads, a cognitive perception, a thought process that has nothing to do with me. Just simple thought experiments. That's the Greek knowledge. We apply that in education when we learn things, mathematical formula, and so forth. The knowledge of the Bible means something that you take into yourself, that you make yourself one with. In the sexual act, body liquid is exchanged, and it produces new life, goodness. This is world-moving. This is very grave and important. This is existential. That is what God did not want, that we unite with evil, that we take it in ourselves and it becomes part of us. And that is what happens. That's why man was infected with evil. That's why we've had this catastrophic results of the fall. I just wanted to state this in the beginning, because we often have wrong and false conceptions that prevent us from getting through to reality and make good decisions. Next. From this first decisions of man to leave the field of blessing and yet to leave paradise, you automatically get into the field of curse. If God has given a field of blessing, I can stand here. If I move on, I drop down. If I don't watch out. If I create a space that is separated from light, if there's only light in this room and I create a space where light cannot get, then I have created darkness. And if I leave the realm of blessing, then I'm in the realm of curse, where God is not. And that's what the humans did. The curse on work and on our life, it brings cruel blossoms in our time. The founder of the German Society of Preventive Medicine, I knew him personally, Gerd Schnack, first president, he said, "The workplace has become the greatest destroyer of workforce." Stress, burnout are title pictures from weekly magazines, Spiegel and Focus, that are well known in Germany. You have to ask yourself, what has the godlessness made of our work? Work was meant to give purpose to man and to fill him, to give him worth, and it destroys him. Not in every case, but we see it happen in our times. Now we have the young economist from Czechia. He addresses what I said in the beginning. He grew up as an atheist, was a very clever, intelligent young man, first president of Czechia after the communism. He chose him to be his advisor when he was only 25. Yale Economic Review names him among the 5 hottest heads in economy worldwide. Somehow in the United States he got in contact with musicians, maybe on a concert. He came to the Christian faith, different way from the Chinese, and he wrote the book that immediately turned into a bestseller, Economics of Good and Evil, Thomas Sedlacek. And he drove a frontal attack against this existing theory of economics, mainstream, that economics has nothing to do with ethics and religion. That's only for theologians, philosophers. They can handle these questions. Here in economics, we have Homo economicus, man as an economic being with material needs, and economics is there to limit or to satisfy these needs. You can also define economics as the distribution of the allocation of limited resources that has to be attributed to people. Sedlacek says, what bullshit, what a nonsense. From the first hours of the existence of human being, he quoted Gilgamesh epos, the oldest writing before the Bible even. Gilgamesh, a ruler, wanted to build a wall, a strong wall around his city, so that the wall would be invincible. And he made his subordinates work to build this wall. And they were to work as much as possible and only rest as much as needed to be fully in full shape again. Zeltacek says, this is the beginning. How you treat people, how people are handled and how they are led is a profound question of religion and ethics. It starts 4,000 years before Christ even. And he caused a lot of stir-up through his book. Back to the foundations that have been laid in our area through the Bible. The old Christian success recipe of Benedict of Nursia, ora et labora, pray and work. Most of you have probably heard it. What is the difference? My question to you, the difference between a Christian and a Buddhist monk. What's the difference? We're in school. How do Christian monks find food and how do Buddhist monks find food? The ones work and the others beg. Both pray and meditate. The Buddhist monks, they also have games, war games that we have in schools, self-defense, kung fu and whatever, but they don't work. The farmers work and they earn and have to make the bread, and from the few things they have to give to the to the monks. They beg. Can you imagine that out of a culture that, in contrast to this, puts work on the level of spiritual practice, work and pray, as two balanced wings, that devices are being invented, machines to ease work, that ways are being sought out to create windmills, water mills, and so forth, technical developments and progress, that this comes out of such a culture. That through it, welfare comes into being that changes the culture. This is what happened in Central Europe. Through the monks, a culture of work was established. Of course, the pride and arrogance of the rich and clever continues to lead to the establishment of a two-class system, even in our church. The clerical order with special robes and clothes that express dignity, and the secular state, the farmers, the merchants, the soldiers. But Luther saw through this, and he confronted it. Yes, we have Luther. Martin Luther made a statement against this, at least it's attributed to him. He gave so many table talks and students wrote, and you don't know today what is originally from Luther, but it fits with Luther. Through his rough talk, plowing fields and washing diapers is of equal service to God as prayer and preaching. You have to let this melt on your tongue and in your nose. Washing diapers is not like today, where you use the Pampers and wipe it away and throw it in the dustbin. No, they had to be washed by hand, and it stinks. And plowing fields is sweaty work. And Luther says, it's equal service of God, like you priests in your high garments and preach and place yourself above others. This was a revolution, this statement. And if you are told this as a craftsman, as a shoemaker, what you do is service to God, you work for the king, then you can't do mediocre work. You cannot use cheap leather or make bad shoes. It's got to be the best. This quality obsession of our engineers has its root here, if we think about work as God's service. This is the difference. And a region that, as Prabhupada quoted, was in the 16th century one of the poor houses in the world, has made it one of the richest areas. Next, we had Luther in Germany, who emphasized vocation and calling and saw work as a service of God. John Calvin in Switzerland had a bigger emphasis on values with a different emphasis. He is, so to speak, the creator of these three Protestant virtues that have become famous: hard work, honesty, and modesty. If you apply these virtues, you can't avoid becoming rich. Who works hard and is modest and is modest and builds honest relationships, he will be rich. That happened with the Jews, and it happened here in Central Europe. Because the Chinese observed this, and that certainly was connected to Cao Xiao's visit to the United States. That's why Max Weber's book, Protestant Ethics and the Spirit of Capitalism, became the bestseller in China in the open phase before the present time, in the early 2000s. Our second value, integrity, love of truth, the honest merchant. In Germany, since the 12th century, we had a culture of the honest merchant. You would do a deal, we'll do this here, give our hands, look deep into our eyes, firm grip, and the deal was made. And everyone would stick to it. And who would not stick to it didn't have to make any deals anymore. He was out. That was a culture, a community of honesty. Your word was valid. What do you believe? Can you think of how efficient this is when you don't need hordes of lawyers that don't work for cheap money, write thick books and contracts that have to be read and studied and controlled. Because in economics, money can only be spent once. Politics may be different, but in economics, it's known that you can spend money only once. And if you have paid it to the lawyers, you cannot pay your better wages to your workers or make investments, or pay your auctioneers. This culture of trust that is built on truthfulness and integrity, it's the most effective and efficient culture of work. That's the basis for wealth. Little trip into German history. A contemporary of Robert Schumann, a famous musician. Robert Schumann, we're in the House of Music here. He wrote many piano pieces. I learned some of them myself. Robert Reinig is a contemporary, and he wrote a poem as a German council in the internet. I'm quoting it. Of all things, one, my child, be true, faithful and true. Let never lie dishonor your mouth. From old ancient times in the German nation, it was the highest fame to be faithful and true. My Austrian friend Millendorfer found this and quoted it, and then he said, "Do you know that this is the name of the returning Christ in Revelation? Have you ever seen this? The white horseman coming as a judge in the last book in Revelation to bring justice, he has a name. First, it is said his name no one knows. That means no one has power over him. If you know the name of another person, you have a certain power over him. That was the understanding in the Oriental world. That's why no one knows his name. 2 or 3 sentences later, it is said, and his name is faithful and true. The returning Christ. Of high interest that here a poem was written that teaches children who grow up in this cultural area to stay faithful and true without lie, to live without lie. And it contains the name of this returning Christ. You can really say here that Reformation cost something, because Luther was the first person. He was the first person in history who demanded school education for every child, boys and girls likewise. That was totally new, had not been existing. Only sons of higher houses, girls no access to education, not even with the Jews. Luther was the first person in history who demanded schools equally for boys and girls. And where were the first schools? There were home schools in the pastor's home. The pastor was the teacher. What did he teach? 10 Commandments and the Catechism. That's how biblical thought, biblical values were distributed and spread in this culture. This led to these poems, this culture of the honest merchant. Now back to the Chinese contemporary. His results of his studies, he investigated U.S. economics. Let's not hear about commenting any presidents. It's the simple people who build businesses, who do honest and good work, who are the backbone of America. That's the guys whom he observed. And then his conclusion was the faith of the Americans in a God who is the truth and hates lie created a culture of trust which is much more efficient than the culture of corruption. I just explained this. But that's his summary of his findings of the U.S. society, the U.S. economics. Third value, trust. Trust is the oil in the gears. Without oil, the gears will crush very quickly. If you have trust in a relationship, it will work very quickly. If there's no trust, what WhatsApp are you reading? Who wrote to you, darling? Or what do you do in your workplace? If there's no trust in relationships, it's poison. It blocks every procedure. But trust needs a basis. Without truthfulness, we just talked about, genuine trust is not possible. It needs trust. There's a very famous American success trainer, Stephen Covey. His English book, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. There's a German title too. I don't remember quite now. His son, same name, Stephen Covey Jr., wrote a book, The Speed of Trust. Speed of trust. The meaning of trust that trust has for all procedures in relationships. Here I brought you one of the big economic entrepreneurs in Germany, famous in all the world. He's one of the examples. You can see this in the Robert Bosch Museum, the picture and the quote is on display there. Always I have acted according to the principle, rather lose money than trust. The untouchability of my promises, the faith in the values of my products and my word were much more important to me than a short-lived profit. No comment needed here. Robert Bosch. Reality today, every second employee does not trust his employer. Ernst & Young in 2016 was not repeated in that extent, but present researches and studies confirm this. Deficits in leadership. More than half of the employees are discontent with their business and they refrain performance. That's the decisive factor. Refraining performance. If only 16%, that are other numbers, fully identify with the company, and over 60% do service work according to prescription, then that costs hundreds of billions of dollars or pounds. This is a simple, clear issue on paper. These are not lofty ideas that you can talk about, discuss in religious classes or in church. These are hard facts of economy. If I don't integrate them, then I can run my business against the wall. I can have the best machines, whatever. If the staff don't work them well and don't work right, the best machines are of no profit. Next transparency. Perhaps you've heard of Klaus Schwab, the founder and leader for many years of the World Economic Forum. He had many plans for the world. He had good starts, good motives, but he tried it without God. He was a humanist, secular humanist, who tried to change the world and make it good and nice without God. He wrote this book, The Great Reset. Some crude thoughts in this book. A video expressed this quite clearly, that he put in the net. There were lots of protests. It was withdrawn quickly. 8 goals that they wanted to accomplish by 2030. And the first goal was be a radiant young man with a light beard. And the caption read, "You will own nothing and you will be happy." You will own nothing and you will be happy. The goal of equality of everyone, we know it from communism. Disowning those who have just built their house for their family. You can discuss this for hours. Those were his plans. And in 2015, he lamented, "We live in a world where trust is falling apart all over." 10 years later, in April 25, he himself has to leave the job because of corruption and misuse of power. If you Google him today, for pages you will have corruption accuses. Tragic. Fourth value, respect and dignity. I chose this picture, but it expresses something of respect and of the human life. Human dignity. If I transfer this into the world of entrepreneurs, business, what is a co-worker for me? Is he a cost factor or a problem? Is he a bearer of performer or a function bearer? Is he productive or human capital? Or is he a personality with unique gifts? My worldview, how I think about humans and about the world, determines my relationship to my worker, and I will treat him accordingly. And our language, the worldview that we have, shapes the language. You can see this in these terms that I have written down here. Productive capital and human capital. They find that human capital is even a nice and a good word, but it's a language that makes man something, a means to reach a goal, a tool to reach goals with. That really stands in sharp contrast to the biblical worldview, and it does not lead to good results in our economy. Next, transparency. The preamble in our basic law says very clearly that it was written in the responsibility before God and men. And the first sentence in paragraph 1 is, "The dignity of man is untouchable." The founding fathers of our social market society and the Republic of Germany, if are people who maybe not as personally pious as I know it, but they were at least people who from their values and their worldview were deeply rooted in the Bible, and they thought from this basis and formulated our constitution from this basis. Because without this statement from Genesis 1, God said, "Let us make men an image in our likeness, in our image." Without this word of God, we are a product of chance. Jacques Monod, Nobel Prize winner from the previous century, said, man must finally wake up from his millennial dream and must realize that he is a gypsy at the fringe of the universe that has no ears for his laments, his songs, and his crimes. He was among the honest people who described human life without God. The dignity of man, as we see it in our basic law, our Constitution, we owe to the Bible. My fifth value is responsibility. Responsibility flows out of this dignity. We read it in our Constitution. It was written in the responsibility before God and men. Responsibility is an interesting phenomenon, a value, that actually marks the becoming adult, the adult process. Children do not take responsibility. If a child hits a chair or a table, then it says, ouch, silly table, why do you stand here? Why do I have to hit myself? Or silly sister, silly brother. A child always puts the blame outside, seeks someone who is to be blamed and who is responsible. An adult person takes responsibility upon himself. I ran against this table. I am responsible for my decisions, for what I do in my professional life. No one stood with a pistol next to my head and said, you now will become a worker on the production line. I have made this decision myself. Maybe the parents were along, but I made it. There are people, however, who maintain this infantile attitude of denying responsibility until their pension years, retirement. Always someone else is responsible. Mama does the school bread, and school gives you grades, and company gives you work and money, and then a partner organizes your life, and then the state takes the retirement payment. But taking responsibility is the mark of an adult. Important value that we need for ourselves. I introduced Rudolf Diesel here. He has been shaped by this culture that had honesty, truthfulness, trust, and responsibility. He's made the statement that I invented the diesel engine is nice, but my most important achievement was that I solved the social question. What does it mean that he resolved the social question? He built businesses, workplaces that men could earn money and provide for their families. There were scores of workless. That was his most important achievement. My sixth value is sustainability, a fashionable word, and a certain party thinks they have invented it, and some think it only was started in the 20th century, when sustainability is as old as our history, at least as old as the history of the Bible. What I told you from the first hours of mankind, the recorded history from paradise, be fruitful, multiply, and shape this garden and this world. That was a command of sustainability, to manage a garden and to keep it for the following generations. This whole history of the Israelites is shaped by this thought of sustainability. Somewhere in the Proverbs it reads, a wise man builds a house for his children's children, the next generation after the next. That's sustainability. The Jews have this in their genes, from the Garden of Eden, from creation. Nothing new that we would have invented. At the moment we just have a problem that we think we could do it all. Because there's no God, we need to save the world. That's a long topic. I'm really questioning whether with the too little savings of carbo-hydrogen, whether we can save the planet and the climate when a volcano in Indonesia throws out more CO2 more carbohydrate in one day than we in hundreds of years. But the public is shown as if there's only one science, like in Corona times, but it has nothing to do with science. Science is striving and struggling about insights until it is building a theory. And but at the present we are experiencing only one opinion that is accepted, and they say follow the science, and other opinions and other findings are pushed aside, which is no science. But I would like to draw our attention to some different topic. In this focus on saving the climate and so the world, we tend to overlook how we treat our most precious asset, our closest relationships, our most important relationships. We save endangered species, but what about our marriages, our partners of life, our children, ourselves, our health? We work ourselves sick, we saw a while ago. We eat ourselves sick. We eat so many unhealthy foods that the nice experiences of age produce to us diabetes of age, arthrosis, and all kinds of pains, rheumatism, all sicknesses of civilization that we would not need. Arteries closed and heart attacks. That's not the Creator's plan. Scientists increasingly show that we have a lot of self-responsibility for our health. It's more than 90% in the meantime. Epigenetics is a new area of research where our habits and our behavior is so much stronger than the inherited genes. We can overwrite inherited weaknesses by changing attitudes and lifestyle. And this new lifestyle, these new habits will be inherited to the next generation, will be handed over. But through our culture and the whole health system, we've been trained to give away responsibility. The doctor will give you the right pills, then you go to the pharmacy and you can continue living as before. Nonsense. We need to take responsibility for our lives. We need to think about what would I have to change perhaps to be less sick, to have less overweight, to have these and that changes and of unnecessary things that we carry around. And then even more our relationships. 22 years ago, in this Professorenforum, we did a symposium on family. In Humboldt University, Berlin, we had some prestigious scientists who talked about the significance of family and the endangerment of family. The freeing up legally of pornography was part of it. Alexander Mitscherlich was part of the game, and our health minister. They had hoped that through giving it free, that you take away the interdiction and then make it less interesting. But the opposite happened. There was an epidemic explosion of pornographics, and you can read this in secular papers. Has nothing to do with Christian morality anymore. This is a danger. It's addictive, highly addictive. 10 seconds of pictures create addiction within us, and it leads to the fact that men become emotionally depraved. They cannot develop bindings, relation. They consider women as sexual objects, and these pictures create an imagination that is transferred consciously or subconsciously into the partner relationship. And no partner can fulfill this, what they see in these pornographic pictures. That's some of the most destructive pandemics that destroys relationships. No one talks about this, only about other pandemics. This pandemic destroys our whole infrastructure of life. Another professor here from Marburg, economist Krüsselberg, talked about this fifth report of the family to the government. In the public and politics, the recognition of the position of the fifth family report that was presented to the government, that only with a successful construction of human performance in school and family, an innovative and efficient economic system can be built, and through that a dynamic and world open society can be built. These professors have always must speak in complicated phrases. It's human performance will only be generated through good family life and good schools. Family and school need to work together, hand in hand. Alone on that basis can a good and profound education, vocational training be built. This report confirms the insight of experts that human performance is founded in the family. Today we live in times where families even question from the highest legal positions, man, woman, child, as defined in our constitution, is being questioned. Some parties define family as a community of responsibility with among various generations. If different generations live together in responsibility, that is family. This would be kindergarten. Different generations living together, and the kindergarten personnel takes responsibility for the kids. Also an old people's home. Different generations take responsibility. The old people and the younger or animal home take responsibility for each other. Since we are animals from the viewpoint of evolution, as we continue this on, everything becomes possible. A British play actor married her cat recently in England. If we turn away from this relation of God that has founded our culture and has given us values and a view of man, then we get into the strangest and most crazy life circumstances, and it does not lead to a successful life. I could quote many other things. As a British anthropologist and ethnologist, Joseph Unwin, he was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud, who developed this theories on sexuality, spread them, and he found out, Joseph Unwin, he studied cultures over more than 80 cultures over a period of 5,000 years, 16 highly developed cultures with the question, sex and culture, how did sexual behavior affect culture? The clear result was if cultures would practice monogamy, contained then and family, then they would flourish and develop. If cultures practiced polygamy or promiscuity, then there was almost no development. If it happened in cultures that had practiced monogamy and family, building on monogamy, if they left this practice and dissolved families, it wouldn't last 3 generations or maximum 100 years till they dissolved. That's the resume of a 600-page study. You can still find it in the internet, but it's almost vanished because it's not popular. They don't like these results. Doesn't fit into the present picture. Next value, courage, boldness, admitting your own mistakes and correcting them. In all cultures we have courage. Maasais have to kill a lion to be a man. I had a Maasai in a Swiss class that I was teaching online, and they introduced him to me, and I asked him, yeah, he has killed 2 lions, this young guy. Wow. I said, oh, respect. They can only take a spear to kill these lions. So courage we find in all cultures. Women that fight against a much stronger intruder and defend their children with the heart of a lioness. That's not what I mean. There's a particular form of courage which we only find in Christian cultures, which is to admit your own mistakes and to correct them and to turn around. I learned this from the Chinese. This professor told me this. The highest value in the Chinese and Eastern culture is to keep face, not admit any mistakes in Asian culture. Keep face. Admitting mistakes is losing authority as a supervisor. That was independently confirmed in a train ride, a young student across, and we started talking. She was studying comparative culture, and all of a sudden she burst out, that these German colleagues can simply admit a mistakes, make it and admit it, and then they get forgiven and can start anew. That we don't have that. That is not possible, Lena. I thought, how interesting. I heard this before. Then I told her, this is because in our culture, in this area here, 2,000 years ago, someone died outside of a city on a cross. He was hit, nailed to the cross for the mischiefs and evil deeds of all of mankind. And he died. That's why we know forgiveness. The highest authority, God himself, was killed and took our blame upon himself. That's why we have a culture of forgiveness. Just alongside Google is a pretty famous company. They have 1,000 applications for one new job. And Harvard Business Review once gave a report on what can other companies learn from Google. I read this, and one element was Google is especially looking for staff who have a high willingness, bring a high willingness to make mistakes, go to run into risks, and then admit these mistakes right away. They once paid $1 million to a staff for a mistake he had made. We cannot imagine this in Germany, because the company drew so much out of these mistakes and made many millions out of it. They found it worth $1 million. But this staff risked it and immediately reported the mistakes and didn't hide it. This is a culture of mistake, and it did not come into existence in China. It was birthed in this Western culture that is shaped by the Bible. That is success generating, because that produces progress if we admit mistakes and receive forgiveness and continue on. Of course not continue with the mistakes. That's clear. On the 17th September of 1997, Chancellor Willy Brandt kneeled before the monument in Warsaw, and he left the protocol all of a sudden and went on his knees, admitting the German guilt before the Jews. These pictures went around the world. There was a flashlight, thunder. All were amazed that the highest German politician, who was not at all involved in this crime, he was abroad because he was persecuted as an enemy of the system, that he identified with this guilt and knelt down in representation of his nation. That is boldness and courage to admit your own mistakes. One of the most important success motors that a society can have. We need the courage to turn from our false ways. The Bible levels the way into it. It knows forgiveness, and there is a place in history for forgiveness, which the Asian cultures don't know, the cross. The only geographical and historical place where the curse was overcome is the cross. Galatians 3:13 says, he became the curse for us. And in Isaiah, for 2,000 years before Christ, 53:3, God put our guilt upon him so that we should have peace, and through his wounds we have been healed. This crucified person changed world history, and many name this cross and the resurrection of Isa as the turning point of history, and that's my opinion as well. It's true. Next picture, values we don't learn from the book of philosophy, but in personal relationships. And in our culture, they were taken from a deep relationship, the God of the Bible. Monks, scientists, statesmen, entrepreneurs lived out of responsibility before God. Gregor Gysi, a German communist from the eastern part, made an interesting quote in a public talk show. "I'm afraid of a godless society." Highly interesting. Words from the mouth of an atheist. I'm profoundly afraid of a godless society, and I think many in our country, in our land, enjoy these fruits that we reap from a culture that the Bible has shaped. But then ourselves, we don't want to have much to do with this God. No, he will interfere with my life. My parents told me in the beginning, you have to decide yourselves whether God can intervene in your life. And many keep him outside. But that's the most stupid thing we can do when we think about it. If God is there, if he has created everything, then he is the one who knows best how I function, how I can find a successful life, how a life of success works. He has thought the rules out that I could come in contact with him. Why are we so repulsive against the personal relationship with God? Jesus Christ opened the door to it, and no one has changed the world so positively as he has. What would the world look like without him? You have to try and picture that. I brought a prayer with me, because we cannot simply change the world. We would like to change politics, and perhaps we chide about one or the other politicians. But what we can change is ourselves. Our new Minister of Economics has made an interesting statement a few days ago. She said, our economic problems are made in Germany. Homemade. Interesting statement, I find. We can slide about Trump and Putin and who knows who, but what does it help? But if we start with ourselves and look, what can we change? What can we do differently? Then we have a chance. That's the beginning. Germany, but it's we in the center. And the best way to work on the values and to be renewed is that we ourselves bring ourselves in contact with God. I brought a prayer along that I have not prayed myself, but similarly, and others have prayed this. And if you came into this room without a relationship with God and through my presentation were encouraged to seek this relationship with God, it might be a good idea to start. But it's more than just playing around a bit with God, like a one-night stand or short relationship. This is something deep. God wants to get in contact with us. And I'm reading this prayer, and I will speak this prayer, and if you want to, you can repeat it. There's this nice statement, God is only one prayer away. I like that. He is so close. He waits. Jesus once said, I'm standing outside the door and knock. If someone hears my voice, opens the door, I will enter in and have fellowship with him, and he with me. But he is outside of the door and knocks. And he will not urge himself on me. He will not press. But this prayer could be a door opener. I'm reading it. Jesus Christ, I have lived my life without you, and I recognize that I've gone astray into disaster. I want to turn to you. I thank you that you have died for my mistakes and wrong ways on the cross, and you have forgiven me. Please take the control in my life as my Lord and God from now on. That's enough. If you have expressed this prayer and spoken this prayer, it's a first step. God will answer. You will realize it one way or other, but talk to others about it. Perhaps someone invited you to come here. That's very important that you don't just keep this for yourself, but you talk about it, share it. It's like having a log of wood in a fire. One log, the fire can be burning, it will go out. Only after 2 or more logs are added, the fire will really burn. We need fellowship and we need each other. We are built for fellowship. Whether here in Christians in vocation or in this church here, Move Church, if you don't know anyone, come to me. But it's important that you talk about it and cultivate this relationship. It's my final words. Then I would like to thank you for listening. Thank you for coming. Didn't stay at home in the garden. Yeah. Thank you for listening.